13th, 2012, and I've been asked to tell about my time in the Army by Dan and Ben. If there's anything more boring, I don't know what it was, but anyhow, here goes. I went to work for Collins in March the 8th, 1942. As I went to work there, they called the draft board and said, "Are you drafting anyone with one eye?" And they said, "Oh no, we never do that." On November the 13th, I received my draft notice and I was sent to Camp Dodge, Iowa. Received word then that we were going to get on a train and we'd go to, we didn't know where because the Army, everything was secret. Our destination was Colorado Springs, home of Camp Carson, where there was a prisoner of war camp that we were going to guard the prisoners. Colorado Springs is a nice little town. It's at the foot of Pikes Peak and the Garden of Gods and many Balancing Rock, many other sightseeings, and now it has the Air Force Academy, which wasn't there when I was there. Camp Carson is at the base of Cheyenne Mountain. Halfway up the mountain there was a zoo and memorial to Will Rogers. Anyhow, we went to the prisoner of war camp. There was no prisoners, but we had to walk a fire guard at night, as a dumb thing to do, as the Army always requires. Our barracks were one story. The coal burning stoves in them. One night in January, a big windstorm came down through Cheyenne Pass, and we got out of the barracks, and it blew all the barracks over, and with the coal stoves, everything was burned. When the windstorm came, we had two big warehouses full of mattresses and supplies for prisoners. They found mattresses miles away at an Air Force base, Peterson Field. Our camp being at the base of the mountains was at a high elevation, so we could see the hangars at that base. It was a training base for P-38s. I should say, I never mentioned it before, but the reason I was at Camp Carson is because I was in limited duty because of being blind in one eye, the eye that I put out when I was 3 years old. Take a knot out of a shoestring. I was asked about basic training, and I can tell you that basic training was, for us people in limited duty, was just learning to drill, march, and shooting a gun, of course, and going through tear gas chambers just to see what the smell like. We'd have to go in a building full of tear gas with our gas masks on, and we get to the end, they'd say lift it up so you can really get a whiff of it, and then you know what it's like. So that was part of our basic training. We learned that our left foot was the one you start off with when you march, and a lot of them, the sergeants would say, well, if you don't know your left foot, put a rock in your right hand and you'll know which is which. So I didn't have much trouble with that. In fact, I had to do a little drill sergeanting at times. When we had to learn to shoot a gun, we had to qualify, and I never could hit the target because being blind in the right eye, and that's the way you line up your sights, and I never could get it, so I had to tip the gun to one side, and that didn't work. I tried shooting left-handed, and that didn't work. So every time I would shoot, I'd get what they called Maggie's drawers. The guy behind the target had a long pole with like pantaloons on the end of it, and it would wave at every time you missed the target. So I seen a lot of Maggie's drawers. Anyhow, after this storm, I got to help in the supply room to help reissue clothes and equipment to all the fellas. And after 2 months in the Army, I became a tech sergeant in the 4th grade, which is a T4 on your chevron. After that, I was in supplies, so they made me a supplies sergeant and a staff sergeant then. Still no prisoners. I'd like to explain a little bit about Section 8s. In civilian life, you don't hear anything about Section 8s. But in the Army, if you're not suited to be in the armed services, you do something nuts or something like that, and they give you a Section 8, which is the paper it's written on, I suppose. An example I can give you of that is one of our fellows thought he was a girl, I guess. He used to have his makeup on all the time, and the black beauty mark on his cheek, and he volunteered to dance in a show that they were putting on, and he did a striptease, which they stopped right there, and he was one of them that got a Section 8 anyhow. After that, I received orders to go to Camp Jefferson Barracks in St. Louis to pick up a AWO prisoner and bring him back to Colorado. I had no idea what that meant. I never had done anything like this. Since to guard POWs, we were to be MPs, military police. So they gave me a band for my arm, military police, a gun and a train ticket, and of course the handcuffs and key. When I got there, I was given this nice guy who had gotten off his train to visit his hometown after being in combat for a while, so he wasn't really much to blame. After returning to camp, the Italian prisoners were there. Shortly after that, the Italian prisoners left and German prisoners were brought in. We didn't see many Italians because they weren't there very long, but the Germans seemed to take care of their quarters and their area around their barracks very well. They put landscaping and stuff around there and made it look real nice. They were all organized, and there must have been about 300 of them. They had their own non-commissioned officers, a first sergeant, mess sergeant, supply sergeant, and an interpreter. His name was Johann Ziegner. His home was in Cologne, and he used to say, "Oh, Sergeant Lowe, I worry so about my family, I hear nothing from them." Before the war, he had sold pianos in the U.S., so he knew more about the U.S. than I did. He had gray hair and was captured in Africa. On April 11, 1944, I was ordered to Camp Barclay, Texas, where I was to join my new outfit, 377th Replacement Company, 100th Battalion. They didn't like their supply sergeant, so they were asking for another one. I had no experience or knew anything about the paperwork or the system, but Lieutenant Dalton was the officer in charge, and he was a real nice guy, and he got me through it all. Barclay was a windy place and had dirt blow under the doors, and every night we had to clean it out in the morning. Stayed there a few days. We received orders to go overseas. Took a train across the country through Canada and into New Jersey, crossed the Hudson River in New York, and got on a French, supposed to be a French luxury liner. It was just a ship and it had a French crew, it was a French boat and had an English crew. And on the way over, they just starved us. They didn't give us our food the way they should. I guess they were saving it for themselves. But every night they would come down in our quarters and try to sell us sandwiches. But it was called the Louis Pasteur, named after the famous Louis Pasteur. And I told you about the food, but not having any food, and our mail clerk was named Epstein from New York, was going around the deck hollering, "Has anybody got a candy bar?" Because we was all starving. We landed okay, and it was D-Day, and all our good troops were landing in France at that time, so we were certainly happy not to be landing there, but we landed in either Liverpool or Northampton. It took a week because of the zigzag course we took to confuse the German submarines. That was June the 6th, 1944. We were trucked to a temporary camp in London. It was in a tent, and it was cold, and very cold, and windy and rainy, and we had just one blanket and our folding cot. It was really froze. It was holes or dug for like foxholes outside of the tents. They were very deep and full of water, and one of our lieutenants didn't see it and walked right into it. What a mess. We then took a train loaded up in the trucks and went to Trowbridge. It was a camp where it was on the hill, and it was Quonset huts. Quonset huts are metal buildings are shaped half round like, and I had one for my supply room. In England, when we were there was a saying about the girls selling themselves would hang out in the hills around the haystacks, and of course it became a joke that there was haystack Annies around the haystacks all the time. We received troops and food and clothes and held them until they were ready to go to the front. One time we received a group that were in prison in the U.S. and they had volunteered for combat to get out of prison. Since they were prisoners, they had no guns, and I had to issue the weapons to them, and I had to keep track of the serial numbers so that they would know who got which gun. The first night, several of them went over the hill, AWOL, and they caught one of them, and I had to go testify at his court-martial because he had left his rifle behind, and we knew that if he left it there, he is gone, and I could identify him by the serial number of his rifle. Later, we learned that they were killed in combat because they had no training while we were there. I received a weekend pass to London, saw all the sights, the Westminster Abbey, St. Paul Cathedral, London Bridge, Big Ben, Piccadilly Circus, Tower of London, and all the government buildings. Later we were ordered to France, across the English Channel, on a landing craft. The craft landed at Le Havre on the 29th of November 1944. It was a beach where there was just a small building, and our pilot of our boat was having trouble keeping it straight enough to get it up onto the beach. We waited for hours there for a train. Finally, when it came, it took us to Compiègne, France, and we stayed in a house overnight and was given our general box lunch of chicken, and I went to a movie that night in a town called Arsenic and Old Ace. It was an old movie where some old gals let guys come to their house and then they murdered them and took their money. One thing I might say is that when we got to France, our company commander got us all together and said, and the first one that gets the venereal disease will get busted, won't have any stripes anymore. And come to behold, he was the first one to get the venereal disease, so we didn't hear any more about that. And I learned that while I was around there that in Compiègne is where Joan of Arc was beheaded, and it was where the First World War peace treaty was signed in a train car. When France was given up in World War II, Hitler made them all go there and sign the surrender in this boxcar, and then he had it sent to Berlin. We were then put in trucks and trucked to Soissons, a little town with the army base on the hill next to it. Oh no, this is France now, I'm sorry. The army had taken over the estate of Le Château de Chesnoy, and it was just a big house with right in the clearing in the middle of a forest of Compiègne. Set up tents all around the forest for incoming troops. I had a tent for supply room. I had forgot to say that we were issued a 50 caliber machine gun, which we had to have in case of fighting, but I had 2 sergeants to take care of it, and I just had to keep track of it. Danny asked me about if I had any help as a supply sergeant, and I didn't have anyone that helped me all the time except the 2 sergeants that took care of the 50 caliber machine gun, but when I needed help, there was plenty of volunteers for that. That winter, I believe in December, the Germans loaded up the front and tried to break through the lines. There was many casualties, and we got a bunch of men that were trained as anti-aircraft. Several GIs who had been wounded and returned to work had to come out there to train them to be in the Army, infantry. Never did hear how they did when they got to the front. I guess the Army was pretty worried that was the only time we carried our weapons. We were lucky they didn't break through, because that was the Battle of the Bulge. There was a large castle nearby named Pierrefonds, which we had a nice place to visit. One of our Jeep drivers said a friend of his had been killed in the war, and his mother had asked him to go there and take a picture of the grave. And he asked me if I'd like to go along, and I went along with him. And this large cemetery was very sad. It was a Ham cemetery in Luxembourg. While we were gone, there was a all the fellas discovered a bunch of champagne in the basement of the chateau, and they decided to make an NCO club out of it. They just traded some of their booze to the Airforce for aluminum sheets to make a bar out of, and ammunition crates to make furniture, and floor where there was dirt floor. Also, parachutes for padding the chairs. But it wasn't long that the officers found out and they took it over. I received a pass for the weekend in Paris. Saw the Seine River with the Notre Dame Cathedral on it, and saw the Louvre Museum with, of course, Mona Lisa. When we were in Paris, we walked all over the city to find everything, the Arc of Triumph, and of course the Eiffel Tower, and the Trocadero, where they tell me the Second World War peace treaty was signed. It was near the Eiffel Tower. In our travels, we noticed a bunch of people, and we found out that we were in a prostitute area, and it was called Pigalle. I guess Pigeal. Anyhow, that was one of the sights that we saw. We also went to the Folies Bergère, big vaudeville show. After processing more troops, I was given a week passed in Switzerland. Started in Basel and took a train to Montreux across the lake from Geneva. I spent several days there in a nice hotel, and while I was there we bowled and rode horses, and bowling balls only had 2 holes in them. And there was a small prison on the shore where they said that Lord Byron was in prison there. I guess he was a poet of some kind. Took a train to see the avalanches in Matterhorn Mountain and stayed there overnight. By then the Japs had surrendered. World War II was over. They set a standard to be discharged. Points were, you get so many points for landing, for length of service, points for battles, points for overseas action. Combat troops had hundreds of points and would be discharged first. I had just 50 points, while most of them guys all had hundreds. So I was sent to Namur, Belgium, to process troops out. I might tell you a little bit about Namur, Belgium. I'm sure some of you want to go there someday on your honeymoon. It was about 20,000, I guess, and had a big hill in the outside of town with cannons on it. I guess must have been there for the Battle of World War, and had kind of fence around it to keep people from climbing the hill. But at night we used to go down in town, and the get something to eat, and there was a restaurant there where we ordered steak, and we all joked about it being horse meat, and it tastes real good, but I'm sure that's what it was. They had no refrigeration there, so all the meat was hanging up on this around the front of the store and inside. They must have had some kind of ice, I suppose. But finally got out March 1946 and home by a train in Marion. Passenger service there was no passenger service in Cedar Rapids. But my folks were there, and Lyle and Lillian and David, all a great sight. Little did I realize that my life was just beginning. I went back to work at Collins, which later became Rockwell, and watched the girls walk up and down the aisles going to break, and I picked out the cutest and modest, most quiet one I could see, very pretty. And I asked my foreman if he would talk to her about a date for me. So I got a date with Pauline, and we got our first date. Pauline and I had our first date was February the 26th, 1948, and we went to Paramount Theater to see Carmen Cavallero, Mexican pianist with his ensemble, and we were married August the 8th, 1948. Had 3 great kids, Diana, Danny, and Donna, and wouldn't have had those without Pauline, of course. And then worked at Collins for 29 years and 3 months. I had a great life. That's about it.